Hey, yo, hey, yo, hey, yo! Welcome back, people! How are y'all doing? Hi, Nikori! Hi, Knifey! Hi, Maddie! All ending on the same syllable. It's awesome. Happy to all have you here. How are y'all doing? Hope you all had a beautiful day. Been doing good myself. What have I been up to today? It's I've been doing a lot of work on the website. I've been doing that for quite a bit. So I've been working on like a refresh from the website and doing some tweaks and optimizing things, which it sounds freaking boring, but I'm freaking excited about. Did like a proper update of like the homepage, so I can't wait until I get to share it because I'm getting to a place where I'm kind of happy with it, so it's gonna be good. Yeah, what else have I been up to? Busy week actually. So, been working on another new thing. I've been working on another new thing together with Adam from the community as well. Making some really good progress. Not going to reveal anything yet, but we're making some really good progress. We had a meeting about that yesterday. And then also, the studio stuff is coming along like awesomely. Like, it's amazing to see all the stuff getting textured and, well, not all of it, right? But we're finally getting to a stage where we're making like really good progress now. It's awesome to see all the stuff coming together. Hi, Andrea. Hi, the apples. Totally forgot I left the stream up and you went into the kitchen and heard yo 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 and thought someone broke into my place. What? Wait, how long have you been leaving the stream on? Not since the last one, right? That would be nuts. Hi, Karav. Hi, Ratwan. Oh, for like 2 minutes before you started. Okay. I thought you still had it open from the last time that I streamed on Friday. That's why I was so confused. Oh my god. All right. No big question today. So I think we're gonna swap on over and we're gonna dive straight in because we got 8 people to go through, so it's probably gonna be packed. So let's get started. And of course, my drawing tablet just refuses to malfunction. Or like refuses to function. There we go. Cool. Okay, so for people that are new here, or for anyone else in the chat, feel free to pitch in with any of your own ideas, right? Or if you have any suggestions as I'm talking through stuff, feel free to pitch in whenever you want. Let's see, what is the order of today? Oh, I'm gonna start with Maddie, because I totally forgot about Maddie last time. So sorry about that, Maddie. Looks like I'm up today. Yeah, exactly. And you're gonna be first. So let's start there. Okay, let's get some context. So Maddie is working on an underpass scene, which let me dig into what is said in the community chat as well. New environment I blocked out for not too long ago. I want to work towards. So far, I've pretty much got the composition I mostly want to focus on. I'm a bit worried that I do not have everything shown in the concept. Any suggestions / feedback on the scaling and proportion is appreciated. But that's from last week, right? So there's probably like a couple of changes. So I have the latest image here. Made some changes to my composition shot where you can see more of the pipes and more of... Oh, you get more of a view of like the church looking building. Yeah, like... Capital or bank or fancy looking building, right? Yeah, cool. First of all, welcome to the community, Maddie. And let's dive in. So, okay, so mostly the feedback you wanted was on the scaling and proportions. Did anything change compared to last week? Feel free to add stuff as I'm diving in, right? Maddie says, yeah, exactly. Just felt last time everything looked packed. Yeah, that's the main thing about the scene, right? Especially if you look at the concept. Like, this scene is busy. Like, really busy. Like, everything is kind of like very noisy. That's also due to the style of the concept, right? Like, even on like the bricks and all that kind of stuff, you kind of feel like there's a lot of noise going on as well. So what I would actually do if I'm approaching this as a project, right? I would try to take away from some of the noise and try to make it like more contrasty. So with contrasty, I mean that you will still have grime and noise, right? But you want to add that in deliberate sections rather than all over the place. So you could have like the majority of the building looking like relatively clean, and then like really focus the grime on like the places that make sense, right? So for example, an area could be where you have like some of the grime down here, but then maybe like a streak down here, like in the concept, but the rest of it is going to be like relatively clean, or maybe some like small stuff under here, right? But it's I would definitely try to push the contrast between the two more, so that you definitely get a feel of clean versus dirty, right? And yeah, maybe try to do a little bit more with the set dressing as well. Like there could be like some really cool opportunities, especially because the streets are like super empty at the moment, right? There's definitely some opportunities there. But let's have a look at the composition. What I'm actually gonna do, I'm gonna do something like this. Right, so this allows you to see like some of the things that have changed, right? And some of the stuff that immediately jumps out to me if we like flip between the two is the main building here feels a little bit more wider than in the concept, right? So I'm gonna get your stuff here. So this building feels wider than in the concept. Also, this bridge kind of stood out to me too, where this bridge would probably be like a little bit more up. Right, so kind of you would put this bridge a little bit more up. And also like the reason why these two things are important, right? At least to me, from like especially if we're switching between the two, is because it emphasizes the height of stuff, right? If you make things more slender, like you're emphasizing the height of the building, and the bridge, if you have it lower down, well, the opposite. If you have it higher up, it would also indicate that stuff is like way higher up, right? So those are like two like easy wins, right? So two like easy adjustments. But then some of the other stuff, right? Like for example, we can clearly see that this building is also a little bit different. But I honestly don't mind the choices that you've made here, because you're adding more space between the bridge and the building itself, right? Where in the concept, like it's kind of in this weird position where you have these two lines that kind of converge, and that really becomes difficult to distinguish where one shape starts and where one shape begins, right? So I like that change that you did here, whether consciously or unconsciously, right? So this space is nice. And then there's some other smaller stuff, right? But I don't think there's anything really big that jumps out, right? I think those two things that I pointed out in the beginning, like especially the difference here between the building and the bridge, I think those have the biggest impact on the overall feel of the actual composition, right? Keep going back and forth to try and close the gap between the two, to be honest. I don't think you need to. I think that space is actually quite nice. There's other ways to fix that, right? So I'll give you like another option. If let's say at some point you were to like make the top of that building a little bit more chunky, right? So it would converge with the bridge itself. What you can do is use more atmosphere to create like a distinction between the foreground element, which is the bridge, and the midground element, which is that building, right? So that could also be another option if at some point you still end up with having those two converging lines, for example. So there's other ways around it, right? Like you're fixing visual problems as you encounter them. And moving the camera is one thing, right? But you can also do it in like a multiple other ways. Maybe the last thing that I'll bring up when it comes to like the composition here is ever so slightly moving this building up. And not up. That's confusing. To the left. Because again, what you're trying to do is sell this visual that everything is kind of crammed together, right? And then you'll get like this perspective of like, oh, everything is tall. Another interesting thing that you could maybe possibly try to play around with is to play with your camera field of view or your focal length. Where you're basically gonna make it that if you have like a wider field of view, like if you can see more, like it's gonna stretch the perspective a little bit, and it's gonna force the lines that are going up. So especially with tall buildings, like you're gonna force a perspective on them, and it's gonna make them appear taller than they actually are. Just as like a little side note with cameras. Yeah, but I think that's mainly it. Like the rest of it, like I think is in a good place. Right, because let's be honest, like not everything needs to be like 100% perfect, right? Like I feel the best concepts are the ones where you take them and you improve them in your own way. So that's why I'm not focusing on perfection, but I'm focusing on like what is the core what is the core concept trying to achieve, right? And that's why I'm focusing on like the height of the buildings, because I think that's like one of the core things that they're trying to show off, is that the layering of like all the buildings. Yeah, that's why I'm focusing so much on that. Currently on 22 focal length right now. I'm also planning to add another camera on the street. Yeah, you could do. Once the scene is finished, I would do that, right? Because there might be some interesting shots that you could do, but I would say you don't want to necessarily make like a whole bunch of new stuff just to make like an additional camera. That's my 2 cents on that, right? But once you got the whole thing finished, like go and explore, right? And maybe you can move some buildings and you get like a nice secondary camera shot. That could be very interesting. Yeah, focus on the one camera. For now. So First up is the verticality of the scene. Try to keep that in mind, right? As a little recap on what we just discussed. And I think that's going to be like the most important one. And then second point is sticking to one camera. Right? Like focus on one camera first. And then the third one was actually trying to focus more on, what would you call it? Because I called it contrast before, right? But let's call it rest versus noise. And with that, I mean that you want to have areas of rest on certain elements to emphasize that there's also going to be noise, right? Like, an easy explanation is that if everything is going to be noisy, then nothing's going to stand out because everything has the same visual value in your scene, right? So adding areas where you have like visual clarity or like visual rest is going to emphasize the areas that are also noisy, right? Or like more dense in detail. So yeah, I would think about like opportunities like that. And maybe that would be my opinion, right? Like if you want to keep it like really noisy and kind of stick to the concept, that could also be a choice, right? In the end, it's your art, so express it however you want. But that would be like my go-to, because if we're, the reason why I bring this up as well, right? Like to kind of reinforce my point is when we're making games, like the areas versus rest versus noise is super important in terms of player guidance, right? Because if you're gonna try to guide a player through like a really noisy scene, they're quickly gonna have no idea where you kind of want them to go. And this rest versus noise is like one of the levers that we can use to actually guide players to where we want them to be, right? So a simple example would be if you have a street corner and there's like one shop, don't make like the entire street shops, right? But make like one shop that is open and maybe the other ones are all closed or whatever, or make them just normal buildings, right? Because then that's going to stand out more compared to the rest of it. So that's why I bring this up as well, just for some additional context. Yeah, cool. Is there anything else that I can help with, Maddie? Feel free to type away in the chat, because I think that kind of concludes it from my end if you wanted to talk about like the scaling and the proportions. And I'll give you some time to react as well. Yeah, I think overall, like a very interesting concept. It's it has a lot of potential to be modular, right? A lot of modular stuff happening. You can easily optimize certain sections of it too, where if one building, let's say one building you've made, but then the style of the other building is slightly the same, you could reuse stuff. You could reuse stuff all over, right? And maybe tint it differently, and you can get away with a lot in this scene. Maddie saying early days yet, I think. I think for now, I will just break the scene into modular bits and do the things you have said. Yep, sounds good. Thank you so much for posting your work as well, Maddie. This is appreciated. And yeah, I'll see you next week. How does that sound? The scene is actually my way of practicing modularity more, because my portfolio kind of lacks it. Oh yeah, this is perfect. Perfect choice for that. Okay, next up, I'm gonna go according to Discord publish date. So next up, we're gonna go with Mr. G. This is a sword that we've been looking at for quite a while, and it's now back. Sorry, just now seeing this, how are the renders? This is from Painter, so it looks a little bit different in Unreal Engine. I have to take updated photos. Is there anything that you see that can use more work? Here are some renders from Marmoset. So, yeah, this one is from Marmoset, like the bottom one here. So this one is from Marmoset. And these are from Unreal Engine. Yeah. I honestly, from all of these, like I like the bottom right one the most. Right? Especially if you're just trying to approach it in like, hey, I just want to present this asset. The only thing that I don't like about it is that the background and like the floor just is metal, as well as the sword being metal, right? So I would probably, if you're trying to present it, I would probably stick with this one. So this one is a favorite one visually. I mean, Marmoset is in general going to render out stuff better, right? Especially if you're thinking about presenting a single asset. Because with all the ray tracing features and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be like a truer representation of real world approximation compared to what Lumen is currently, right? Because Lumen is awesome, but it has a lot of drawbacks as well. So, yeah. I like this one. I would definitely change the background, right? Like we talked about. And this applies to like both of them, right? Like both this one on the bottom right. Yeah, I thought the bottom right one was the real sword. Yeah, me too. That's why I thought like sticking with that one, right? Because that is such a good one. Um but I would definitely like change the background, right? And honestly, then yeah, it just becomes more about the presentation on that one, right? Because this shot looks awesome. I think some of the other shots, let me show you some of the other shots as well. Because obviously I have context, right? So this is another shot in that same scene. Right? But it doesn't have that look and that quality to it. Mostly because it probably has something to do with the depth of field, because the depth of field is really strong on the first one. And it kind of has like a macro lens kind of feel to it, right? Where this one is just like, oh, I'm just taking a screenshot from my viewport. Almost, right? Let's see, some of the other ones. Yeah, like definitely this one is my favorite out of all of them. Yeah. The only thing that it needs is a different background. I'm gonna add to. Because the metal to metal doesn't work, right? And the same happens in the other screenshots as well, where it's just gray on gray, right? Like it doesn't. It's so hard to distinguish like one object from the other one that it's kind of annoying, right? I would pick something like maybe something like way darker. I think you kind of had something like that way before. Look. Yeah, I guess something more like this, right? Oh. There goes my drawing tablet again. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back. Let me make sure that this is set up. Sorry for the inconvenience. Technical issues abound. So yeah, something like this, right? Where the background is more darker and the sword stands out more. Like maybe this is a little bit too much because it feels really dark, but I think with that also has to do with how you lit the whole scene, right? I think if you take your scene currently and how it's lit and then put like a darker material underneath it, I think you're gonna be in like a way better position than you were whenever you took this one. And that's honestly like the main stuff I have to say. So the sword blends with the background. What I would also say is, if you're doing like these quality renders, right? Like, think about the story. Like, what's a story here, right? Like, if you think about it, like right now, it is just like a sword presented on like a metallic surface, but you can really infuse it with like a little bit of extra, juice, right? When you infuse like a little bit of storytelling into it. For example, it would maybe be awesome to have like a leather carrying pouch that, let's say this is like a fictional scene, right? Like set in the fantasy world where someone is trying to get their sword like cleaned up or something in like a professional way. And you could have it like wrapped in like a piece of cloth that they're handing to like a blacksmith or something. You know, like you can, like Scott was saying, you can do like a museum exhibit, a little paper tag around the handle could be cool. Where again you could have it on like a little piece of what is it, velvet almost, right? Where it's like it's more fancy and it's more presentable, right? Like this is a unique sword that they found. You can go all kinds of ways, right? Like that's something that I'll leave up to you. But think about the story here and try to infuse it with a little bit more. Let's bolden up the story. Yeah, there's a lot of cool options. I think this is really good, right? Like the details that you've added here, like you have like layering going on. You have these little edges, like these little separations, and they're not just like straight separations, they have some character to them as well. Like I like all the detail that you've put into it. Honestly, it feels like a very well layered thing. If there was one thing that I would say is the scratches on the Damascus feel like a little bit too generic. Like it just feels like, oh, I have like a scratch generator, I'm just gonna slap it on top of it, right? There's no rhyme or reason or like no real logic to it to me yet. But the rest of it is in a good place. Yeah, I honestly think that the most important thing is just the presentation and the lighting at this point, right? Where you really get that sold for like each shot. And try to find like some cool camera angles, right? Yeah. Cool. Good luck, Mr. G. And then who do we have next? We got Eloy next. Yeah, but that's a great idea, Scott. Like a museum exhibit, little paper tag. Like it doesn't, when we talk about presentation and like adding a little bit of storytelling to it, right? I'm not talking about like adding a whole scene to it, right? You could literally go to Megascans, grab like a piece of fabric or a piece of cloth, like make it look really nice on like a nice bit of geometry, add it underneath it, and you're good. Right? Like that could be enough. It depends on you how far you want to push it. Maybe there's a tag that's added to it. Maybe there's something else, right? Like you can go so many cool ways. Definitely think about it. It's worth adding. Hi George. Hi second favorite. Good to see you both. Let's adding a link. Yes. Yeah, something like that could be really cool. Could be really cool. I love it. Okay, before we dive into the next one, I'm gonna grab a little bit of water. Okay. Next up, Eloy. Let's get some context first. Eloy did some asset improvements. Don't mind the yellow textures. I'm still wondering how to approach the destruction, so any advice on that would be amazing. Awesome. Okay. That's awesome. Okay. Let's dig into it, right? We got a couple of screenshots here. These pillars are coming together nicely. Watch out with these hard cuts in the geometry, but the rest of it is looking quite nice. Yes, so destruction. Let's break that down a little bit. Let's see. So I would first start, right? If you're handling destruction, you kind of have to do like a little bit of pre-planning and like a little bit of research and figure out what materials you are dealing with, right? So you have these guys, right? Like your tiles. That's your top layer. Right? But what's going to be in between it? Because now I think you got some like sand or something like that in between. I think that would be cool, but then you would kind of expect sand between the cracks as well, right? So think about like the layering that you're going to have to put in, because in this case, like you have like a very flimsy top layer, but what will probably happen is that you, depending on what kind of style you're looking for, right, is you would have, let's say, your top layer. And so if we just take like this as a snippet, right, you would then divide that into, so top, you have your middle layer, and then you have like the ceiling layer, or like the bottom layer in this case. Right? And the bottom layer would probably be bricks as well, right? Or like stone or something like that. Let's say stone. And then let's actually see, right? Because how would they build something like this? It would probably be stone all the way through, right? And then they would layer like bricks on top of it, or like not bricks, but like these hexagonal tiles that you have on top of it. And then kind of fill it up with like some filler material. So I would actually go for something where it's 2 layers, right? Like you have your top. Because you also don't need to go super complex, right? I would say the bottom is stone, the top are these hexagons, right? Okay, so how do we approach destruction then when it comes to these guys, right? Let's start with the top layer here first. Let's move that on up a little bit. So these are the layers of the floor. All right, let's get rid of all this stuff. So what you then need to do is kind of the same approach that you did as well with the bottom, right? Is I like what you're doing here, where you're cutting out like individual tiles, and you're kind of placing it on the edge, and you're really following the pattern of it, right? That's awesome. I would definitely say keep doing that, and then apply the same thing on the top here as well, right? And then the middle section here, so you would kind of have like your little hexagons, like maybe they have like a nice kind of thickness added to them as well, right? So you would have like some hexagons sticking out, like maybe some of them are kind of broken. And then the middle of it would probably be like these solid pieces of stone, or maybe there's like 2 layers of stone where, let's see. I'm kind of defining like the main pattern first, right? So we would have like 1 layer, and then maybe you have like a more frequently repeating layer here. Right, so it would be like these 2 layers of bricks instead of the 1. Like stones. And once we kind of know what our base layering is going to be, where you have like the stones and then the stones that are just laid upon it into like a different direction, then we can kind of figure out how to break them up, right? So you could have, let's draw this from the top, right? So if you imagine that this is our section, right? Like what you could do, I'm going to do it layer by layer, right? Do we need like another color for this? I don't know. So let's say we have our big layer first, which is just 2 stones, let's say, right? And then those stones are already like a bit cracked. So we have like 1 that is like severely damaged. You would probably have to like sculpt these, right? Like as individual pieces. And then maybe the other one is just slightly cracked instead. But it has like a little chip. So that's layer 1. Then layer 2 is where we have these sections of stone that are probably like, I don't know, angled upon it or something like that, right? So let's see if we can kind of break it down. Let's try a different color in different layers so that we have some flexibility. I'm just going to be very crude with this, right? So these are like the different layers that are added upon it. The base layer of this one is already broken, so that means that this tile is probably also going to be like really broken. Right? Maybe even to this kind of degree. Right, and you kind of add like a little bit of 3-dimensionality to it. You're not really going to see this, but this could also have like a couple of cracks in it or something. It has some cracks into it as well. Don't want to have stuff aligned like that. Right, so that would be like a secondary layer. So we're still looking at it from the top, right? So all we see is a secondary layer now. Right, and then you just add like your tiles on that, right? We'll grab another color. And then you just start adding like your little hexagon boys on it. Right, but then maybe this one is cracked as well. Maybe there's like little bits of rubble that kind of line on top of it. And then we can kind of remove this stuff again, paint it on the wrong layer. Right, so you're kind of building it up in layers as you go along. Right, and that's how I would break it up. So we have 3 different layers now. And number 3. So you have like big stones, smaller stones, and then your tiles on that, right? Especially for something that you're going to be looking at like straight like this, that would probably be the way to go. Then a way to approach this, you could do it where you kind of build these pieces, right? However, you don't necessarily need to do that. What you could do is, let's say, so this is our layering, right? Let's so first one is big stone. Just making sure that all the notes are okay. Small stone. And then tiles. Cool. So back to the workflow now. Like what you could actually do is, you don't necessarily need to bake like all these individual bits to make them look really good, right? A common approach in games is where if you have, let's say again, we're looking at the top of like, let's say one big rock, right? And then we cut out like a section of it. And then let's say we have like a little bit of 3-dimensionality going on. And we just removed the leftovers. So this is our cracked piece of rock. What you can actually do in this case is you would have your bake still affecting like the main piece of the geometry that's not affected. And as soon as you start breaking stuff off, right? As soon as you get to the destroyed part, that's where you place it with like a rubble tileable. So like the actual main piece of geometry could still be like a large block that has like a lot of sculpting information onto it, right? But then as soon as you like start chopping off like a section, then you just slap like a rubble tileable on it that has like, I don't know, it looks like it's kind of like a broken off section of a stone, right? But it can be pretty generic. And then you just add more geometry to compensate for that. So you would add like a little bevel here. Make sure that it's not following like a straight line, but keep it like nice and organic. And that's a way where you can break this up with like a tileable for the sides that are broken off, and like a flat surface that could still use like your bake or another tileable. Let me give you a visual example. So we go to let's see, my R station. Let me see if we can show that off. I think I brought up this example before. Let me see if I have a good example here. think this one is good. Let me just paste that in here. Okay, so this is an example from the work that I did, right? I mean, work that I did, like the work that we did, right? Like this is a project that has been through many people's hands and we outsourced and all that stuff, right? So this is not 100% what I did. I was mostly responsible for the set dressing here. Apart from that caveat, let's have a look at some of these pieces of rubble, right? Like if you were to break it down, we can actually see that... God. Do not paint on the image, please. Yes. So like, this is like a very, very layered thing that I'm pointing out right now. Where these pieces of rubble, they're mainly built out of tidables and reusable stuff. So we have like the tidable on top of it, right? Which is just like a generic concrete. And then we have like a rubble on the side of it. Like, which is our number 2. And then what we sometimes did is we would have like a third option. I know that the picture is quite low res. Let me actually see if I can... Yeah. Zoom in a little bit. This is a bit... Yeah, so you can kind of see it a little bit better now. So the top of this is going to be concrete, right? The size of this is going to be like a damaged concrete in this case. That's number 2. And then sometimes you would have like these like decals on top of it. That would be like number 3, which would be like a decal sheet of cracks. That would be a separate texture as well. And then using all that in combination together with some vertex paint to have like a little... Well, I mean, in our case, it was something different, but like in Unreal, you could use some vertex paint to have like some additional variation on top of it, right? But that's like how you can make something like this work without having to go crazy with like a bunch of unique stuff, right? But yeah, the stuff that you're doing here already looks good. Again, it becomes about like tying stuff together, right? Like we spoke about that last week, where the values, like the color values between all of it are so wide ranging that you would probably want to make this more more darker, right? Or more dark. Because you can kind of see that here, right? Like the rubble kind of has like a very similar like base color. And that's just because that it kind of matches together and it doesn't look like it's like highly contrasting, right? So the colors here are similar. That's how I would approach it. So let's do a little bit of a recap, right? So number 1 is think about layering, right? So I'm just going to call it layering. Because you need to know how the internals of something work before you can start breaking them down, right? Number 2 would then be follow the patterns, right? If there are any. And in your case, I'm talking about like the patterns of the rocks, right? If you're going to use the technique that we were talking about before, like the stones, or the patterns of the hexagons of the floor tiles that you have. And then number 3 is match colors together. Yeah. Okay, we're back. Very useful stuff, thank you. Yeah, so the last thing that I wanted to say here was just like, yeah, you can work with mixing tilables, right? If you are looking for some more information on this, if you go into the PDF, there actually is a page on how I approach something like this as well, if you want like a deeper dive onto this. So, yeah, that's the way that I would approach this. Like when doing destruction, right? Because you don't want to spend a lot of time making like everything baked down and all that kind of stuff. Like that would be, I mean, it would look good, right? But you would have to do so much of it that it becomes like an enormous time sink. So yeah. Thank you so much for putting up your work, Eloy. And then, yeah, I'm looking forward, to see how this is coming together, because what I'm seeing here looks awesome already. So great job. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. Doo-doo-doo. Where are we? Work in progress. There we go. Okay. Next one is from George. Where's George in the list? There we go. I've come back after a long time of not reporting. Still a lot of polish to do. I was hoping on getting some feedback on things that may look out of place or weird and that can be improved. Okay, any suggestions and ideas are welcome. Sorry for not having specific feedback. Yeah, no, that's all right. I'll just stick to the stuff that looks weird, right? I think from the shots that I'm seeing, right? There's a couple of additional shots in the Discord as well that I'm looking at. But yeah, from what I can tell, like this thing right here, I mean, it is the most important thing in the scene, right? Like it is like the, if you're talking about like the main composition, that's going to be the thing that's going to stand out the most. And right now, the texturing of it feels just really weird. And you know what you might have done? I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and is that you've been playing around with the particle brushes in Substance Painter. I'm gonna go out on a limb, but like all these kind of streaks where you have like these, I don't know, like very recognizable patterns, kind of feels weird. I would probably think about this sort of damage in like a more, yeah, just the last layer. I kind of knew it. But I would approach this texturing in like a way where you look at the bigger picture, right? And try to have like some built-in, we talked about this before, I think, like some built-in directionality, right? Because if you approach it in like a very generic way, it's going to look really generic, right? So, yeah, I mean, you got the examples here, right? Like, I think this could be like a way more interesting approach, especially if you look at the layering here, right? Where it almost looks like you have, let's zoom out a little bit. So you have layer 1, which is like the yellow paint. And then you have the orange paint. And then you can see the metal, right? So there's like 3 layers going on. But from this, right, like we can't really distinguish any of the layering. I can see that they're kind of in there, right? But it's kind of like we talked about in the first example today from Maddie's work. Even though we're talking more about the concept, right? Like think about rest versus detail, right? You don't want everything to be like fully noisy, because then nothing's going to be noisy. It's just going to be like, I mean, everything's going to be noisy, right? Like there's no point to really focus on. So I would definitely like really contrast it to like a certain area or like certain areas, right? Or even think about a layering where stuff closer to the ground has more exposed, let's say more metal, right? And then from this point on, like it becomes a blend between the yellow and orange. And the reason why I say more metal at the floor is because that's closer to the ground, right? So you're probably going to have like more interference and more contact with stuff that's going to come rolling across the floor or is bumping against it, like heavy rocks or something like that, right? So yeah, I would definitely think about like rest versus noise, right? And then number 2 would be think about the layering. And like make the layering like very apparent in like a certain area, like in certain areas. Because I mean, look at, I keep saying it, like you have the perfect example here, right? Like you can tell that this thing has been damaged just over time, right? But it's not noisy in a way that you would probably expect it to be either, right? So it kind of has this like very cool feel to it, where you can tell that at the spots where you would expect it to be like worn, like on the hinges or like transitions between like the different plates, right? Or at the bottom, you're seeing more exposed metal, and the rest of it just has more of the paint layers. Yeah, I like what you're doing with the spacecraft though. I like where that is going. I'm mostly curious between these two, right? I mean, I know that you still need to texture all of this up, right? But it kind of already brings up the point where it's like, okay, I don't know what the relationship between the two is, right? So I would say think about that a little bit, because the reason why I'm confused is because like this seems to predate this thing over here, right? So it's like a 1 in a million chance that this thing crash landed next to it, or maybe you have to visualize it in a way where you can tell that a person has been dragging it through like the sand or something like that. Maybe that's what this is, right? Like maybe I'm reading too much into it, and maybe you're already thinking about this. But yeah, I would definitely like keep that as like a focus point, right? Like there's a story between those two things. Love some of the shots that you have here. Especially this guy. Guy stands out to me. Especially because you have like this, it's like very monotone, right? Like it's almost sepia. Like you have this one color compared to like almost no color. Pretty cool. Dragon is the idea. Oh, okay. Yep. That's cool. Just make sure that you like really emphasize that then, right? Because that could be interesting. Also, I mean, if you're going that way, I'm just throwing out like random questions, right? How did one person drag this, right? And when I ask these questions, it's not like I'm saying that, oh, this is impossible, right? I think I'm trying to prompt you to think about a creative solution, how one person would drag this, right? Because there's creative solutions around it, right? And I'm curious to see what solution you're gonna pick. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, but that's the main thing, right? I kind of picked these shots because the main capsule kind of needed like the most work in my opinion, right? You have some additional shots here as well that I didn't pick. That, I mean, they look good, right? They looked good before as well, so I'm kind of happy to see that they're still in there and kind of have been tweaked a little bit. But yeah, I think these are the main things that stand out to me in terms of like the whole scene currently. Cool. I think let's have a look. Thanks, Tim. We'll keep on pushing. Let me see if there's anything else in the text, right? Still have some pushing to do, such as finishing the boxes, adding variation to the landscape. The satellite design has been the most difficult part for me, but I enjoy what I have at the moment. Yeah, like the satellite that you have at the moment actually looks really nice, right? Because it is a very distinct and recognizable shape. So I like the shape that you picked because it is so recognizable, right? So great choice on that. I like it. And then number 4 is adding fog cards and making floating particles. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I would definitely say keep refining the idea that you have here, right? I would also say let me think about this one. Because this is going to be like a personal thing, right? So let's start out with that caveat. But from the references that I'm seeing here as well, what I like about those references is the mood that they convey and like the type of isolation and I don't know, almost like desperation as well, right? Where you can imagine that one person crash landed here and you kind of don't know the fate of the person, but it's highly likely that they didn't make it, right? And it's kind of a long way of saying that I feel like the more you start adding to the scene, it's kind of taken away from like the main question that I would have if you didn't have a lot of stuff in the scene. And for me, that main question would be like, is there still someone here? And it kind of invokes like a very, very lonesome feeling, right? Like a feeling of loneliness almost. Which, again, I say this with the caveat that this is your thing, right? So I'm not saying that is the best way to go about it or the way that I would do it. Just as like to call it like a recognition of maybe something that you're deviating from if you initially set it out to have it like kind of focused on like the lonely part, right? And maybe a word that comes to mind to me is also minimalistic, right? Like a lot of these pieces, like they're very minimalistic in design, just because they really want to emphasize that you're alone and by yourself, right? Like fighting against nature. So yeah, I mean, I love what you did with the satellite, right? And I'm kind of interested to see if you can kind of make it into like this guy or this person is still surviving and is still thriving out there regardless of all the odds, right? But that would be a choice that takes the scene in a slightly different direction, right? It's a great point. I'm now thinking of the balance between the elements in the scene, like less is more. Yeah, I think so. That would be... Again, you don't have to do it, right? But I think it would be a thing to consider. Like, what is the mood that you're trying to convey? And what is the thing that you're trying to convey with, like, the visuals, right? And that doesn't mean that you can't have, like, any scrap around it, right? But then think about... Maybe a more poignant question to this would be, why is this person dragging like an entire module of like a spaceship all over to his place? When most likely whatever he needs are probably just the solar panels or something, right? So why doesn't he like strip off those little bits of it? I mean, some interesting questions, right? Like hopefully they kind of prompt you to think about it a little bit more. And I'm really curious to see what your visual response to all of it is, right? Because I think it's in the end it's going to make for like a more cohesive picture. Great question, yes. Yep. Think about it. Keep up the great work. And you know, there's always opportunities and always creative solutions to anything, right? So even if, let's say worst case scenario, you decide to cut like the whole satellite module, no one's stopping you from making it like a separate prop afterwards, right? Nothing really lost. It's in my opinion. Yeah, cool. Thanks, George. Keep up the great work, and also welcome back. It's good to have you back. Okay. Thanks a lot. No worries. Happy to help. And I'm looking forward to the next update. Okay, next up, we got Populus. A small update this time around. Well, at least in terms of what was asked, right? I think there's a lot of updates on Populus' side. Sculpting some rocks, sculpted a new archway along the river, refined some of these pillars, like we got some crystals, made a dirt pathway, like a lot of stuff has been done. So great job. Oh yeah, this is the rock that got added in. So yeah, nice. Okay, some smaller bits of feedback then, right? Like we kind of did a lot of talking last time about like what you could do with the bridge. But it seems like that wasn't really the focus of this time around. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. What I will say is I did like the previous pillars more. Like the previous magical pillars. And I'll explain why in just a second. It always kind of sucks, right? When this sort of stuff comes up. I'm just gonna say I missed the previous pillars. So the reason why is because you've got some ruins, like not ruins, but like runes on it. And they're kind of like very reminiscent to, I don't know, some Viking, Nordic with like a little bit of a mixture of like Asian culture in there, right? Because they're not your stereotypical runes. I don't know. It feels like it leads more into like something very specific to something where you could make up your own story with like what the magic was, right? Whereas if we look at the update from last week, let's see, because we can make the comparison, right? Like this sort of stuff, like you can kind of make up your own little story, right? It doesn't really tell you anything. It doesn't have like a specific culture or something attached to it. It's just like, oh, it's a nice magical rock, you know? Oh, totally didn't see the crystals. They were there before. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it. I don't really like it myself personally. But again, like I always say, like doesn't matter in the end, right? Like take it or leave it kind of thing. It's your art in the end, right? What I do like though is like the little archway. I like the sculpt that you did for it. That's come out real nice, especially compared to the last one. This is awesome. So I love it. Let me just add that smiley here. Then the rocks, they're looking pretty good. I would maybe think about this moss. Could use some noise, right? Like could use some sort of detail. I could use some sort of detail because now it's kind of like a flat color on top of it. And I think you can do something interesting where you make it like slightly noisy, not too noisy, right? But you have like something there to indicate that it's not just like a flat color. But yeah, rock is looking good. Like it. And then we go on to these kind of textures over here. They're decent, right? Like I think with a texture like this, you always have to look at the in-scene stuff, and I don't think I grabbed like a zoomed in one. Yeah, so this would be like the zoomed in version, right? Okay. I'm gonna do like a quick snip. Because I wanna say something real quick. This soft transition. It's personal preference, right? But if you're looking for something that's a little bit harsher and has like a little bit more of definition in it, like looking to blending with height maps. So height blending for crisp edges. So what that is gonna do, it's gonna take your height map either from the bottom layer or the top layer, depends on what you want to do, right? And then it will basically blend between the 2 textures based on that single texture. It will blend between the 2 layers based on that texture. That's probably a better way of wording it. So you could have like your height map from your dirt. And then you could use that to get like a little bit more of a crisper and defined blend between those 2 layers. I would definitely look into that. Then we get to this boy here. A couple of small tweaks. This stone that kind of looks like a folder. That's not usually how stones would be carved, right? Like you would probably have like a single small rock here, and then a bigger rock here. So split rocks. The same can be said over about this little section here as well, right? And then also, what I would really look at is the rocks still feel like blocks, right? Where like you have like really nicely sculpted edges, but then the silhouette of the rock is just still like a block, right? So I think if you want to add like nicer deformation into it, you'll have to sculpt the entire edge, right? And like make it nicely and deformed. And then what you do, if you're sculpting this in ZBrush, you just basically fill the gaps by using the move tool and like squishing stuff together, you know? Like if you're working with different subtools, you just switch to like a different rock and you move that closer in and you kind of fill up the gaps, right? And then you're kind of getting rid of that like very blocky shape feel. And then also the last thing that I'll bring up, be careful about these edges. Let me... Because that is going to cause serious issues for if you have like multiple tiles of this. I don't know if we have a screenshot where you kind of show it off, right? Yeah. So let's look at this screenshot. And look at this line over here. Right? Like this entire line. Oh, just move my mouse for there's like a line over here. And that's just purely because that's also a line in the texture. And if you then tile it, like it's going to be very repeatable. Whereas the rest of the texture, like if you look to the left, right, like you still have a little bit of it, but like the rest of it feels kind of like really nice and organic. So it's kind of a shame to have that straight line in there. I think just, yeah, approach it the same way as you did on the opposite side, and then you're really good. You're good to go. Cool. So those are like a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. Overall, I'm really liking the updates and I'm liking the progress, right? Where it's gonna go. So keep it up. I would say as like a little recap, definitely the texture improvements are a big one, right? Because that's technical. And number 2 would be pillars. I'm gonna add a question mark to it because, again, very personal here, right? Like if this is the direction that you want to take it, that's great. Oh, and then also number 3 is moss on the rocks, right? Those like 3 things that I would consider thinking about for this update. There is a small one, like because you were running into issues with I couldn't quite get them to feel like they looked carved into the stone, even though I was using normal maps and everything. It behaves a bit weird with emissive. Yeah, so I wanted to bring up there that what you would want to do in that is so if we zoom into this guy, right? And let's say this is your pattern, right? Like what you would do is you would add like a secondary layer to it where this stuff would be the normal. So that would be like a normal edge, right? So you're carving it into the stone, right? And then the inner part, that would be like your little emissive area. So that means that even if you have emissive on it, right, it won't interfere with the normal edge that you're trying to create, right? So you would carve it into it and then have emissive like on the interior of it. And that will get rid of, then you're making sure that you can see the normal that you sculpted into it. Yeah. Cool. So that's it for this week, Populus. Thank you so much for posting your work. I know that you can't be here this week, but yeah, let me know what you think. And again, thanks for posting your work. Cool. And then we have, how many more do we have? So we got 3 more to go. Starting with Mishla. Where's Mishla? There's Mishla. Mostly need feedback on the block out so far. Hi, Mishla. I'm really weak in design. Also, as well as how would you see a trim sheet for a project like this? And what kind of tools, from your point of view, would you think would be useful for the scene? Can you explain tools with what you mean by that, Mishla? Are you talking about like opportunities to use Houdini, or tools as in workflows, what I would use? Houdini tools I can make. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so let's break this down. Give me lo-fi vibes. Yeah, yeah, let's start there. I love what you did with like the latest read light, because before that it was kind of looking really flat, and then you changed it to this, and I like the vibes of this a lot. So wanted to throw that out there as well. Thank you for bringing that up as well, Andrea. It's awesome. Cool. So number 1, be back on the block out so far. Really weak in design. Yeah, so for this, right, I'm sure that you looked at some references, and I'm gonna be honest, like, these kind of buildings have never really been my thing. And I don't, that's a long way of saying, like, I don't have, like, fresh references in mind, right? So a lot of this stuff that I'm gonna say is gonna come from my perception rather than like a catalog of, like, visual stuff that I looked at. So keep that in mind. There's a couple of things that I want to point out, though, with that in mind. Is I like the majority of the buildings, right? Like, they have like a very classical architecture to it. Apart from certain sections where this section feels really modern. Because it is just a square building. It has like the big windows in it, right? Like, it kind of feels like very modern compared to some of the older stuff. Because a lot of this is like old brickwork buildings, right? Whereas out of this entire row of buildings, like, I feel like this one kind of feels a little bit out of place. We're talking about the design of things. And then also, this is a weird one. I think I was trying to think like what was weird proportions wise, but there's a weird thing here where this is a door, and this is also a door, but like this door feels enormous compared to this one, right? So, and there can be a couple of things for this, right? Like, there can be like really big wooden doors, because they do have those, right? Whereas it's like, how'd you call them, like, in English? I don't even know. Like they're basically the high ceiling buildings, right? Where the doors are really big and like it kind of was meant to make like the whole building more spacious. So it would kind of need a big door. It's just in relationship to each other, like it kind of feels like this is really small or this is too tall. And that would be something that I would look at. Like there's a couple of ways that you could fix it. That's the thing that kind of feels off to me right now. And maybe it's also like this canopy, like maybe being really low, right? Because let's say, I don't know. How big is this door, roughly? That's one of the benefits here though. So let's do a new layer. Right? Let's say this is our average character. Let's move our character around. That. And that kind of matches with that door, right? And then this would be like a taller door as well. Yeah. I totally see it. And I see that all the doors feel all over the place. I think I had issues. I need to make those a little bit uniform, right? I think that's also a thing. I don't know what the issue was, right? So that's why our little characters kind of floating here, because it feels like those two doors are similar, right? Even though this one kind of feels like a little bit more narrow, like this door over here. But I don't think that's a huge deal, right? I think it's just because these two doors here, they're so close to each other that they kind of feel like they're very what is it? Like very distinct from each other, right? Like there seems to be like a scale difference. But also, yeah, maybe the canopy is really low to me. Could also be it. Right, because usually it's not just like one thing. It could be like a combination of like a bunch of factors, right? And then also to make it even worse, like the kind of layers that you have here in these traditional buildings kind of means that you're dealing with like differences in building heights too, right? Let's see. Yeah, I'm looking at some of your ref, right? Like you posted like one picture that is really useful. This is interesting. Okay, so let me bring up your ref. Especially this guy in a bit. Wait, which... Let's just do this one. But this is actually quite interesting, right? Because I think I've kind of found what the issue is compared to real life, at least. Is that if you have... So this is the ground floor, right? So this is number 0. And then you would have like floor number 1. Cool. However, this door, because that door and like that entryway is so big, it kind of starts like in a weird position. You can kind of say the same thing here. It doesn't start at 0, right? And then has like a really big door in it. It kind of starts at like half and then has like a really big door in it. Right? Whereas in your one, like it kind of starts like at 0 and then has a really big door in it. And that might contribute to this feeling, right? Like if you were to say like, hey, I'm going to push this door down as well, where the top of the door kind of aligns with where you would normally see like a normal door as well, maybe that's a part of the issue. But yeah, play around with that. Thank you so much for putting up reference as well, because this is super helpful. Comparison. Right, like, this little section is important. But anyway. That's like an introduction to it, right? And then let's jump on to the next thing. I think overall in design, I think it's quite good, right? Like, it's kind of getting the feeling across of these traditional, these traditional like brick and mortar buildings. So I kind of like it. Yeah, let's move on. So you also asked me, like, how would you see a trim sheet for a project like this? And what kind of tools, from your point of view, would you think would be useful in the scene? Let's start with the second one. So what kind of tools would I think useful for a scene like this? God, there's only one of them, right? That would really be useful if you're thinking about a certain scale. However, with this scene, you're not really building at scale. Like, the only tool that I can think of is like maybe like a procedural building, right? But that's kind of boring in terms of tools, right? Because everyone and their cat is making a procedural building generator, especially if you're doing like, that's your intro to tech art, right? Yeah, I can't really think about any other tool that would be really, really helpful though. And that is also the reason why I'm not a technical artist, right? Like, I think a lot of that stuff usually comes up as you're building it, right? That's where my ideas for tools come up with. So I would say start developing the project and then see what kind of tool you want to build. Yep, I'm brain dead, and a building gen is easy. Yeah, it depends on what kind of flexibility you wanna build in there, right? Because yeah, you can make something like that like really complex, really simple, like really easy. But yeah, my recommendation would be, if you're looking for tool inspiration, like start building it, and then where you run into bottlenecks, make a tool for it. You have a couple of ideas for a signage generator, a stair generator, modules generator. I just wanted to ask in case you would have some other ideas. Yeah, I'm currently working on like a modules generator as well. But yeah, I feel I don't really have interesting ideas, right? Like a modules generator, like I have one as well, where you could use the sockets of like buildings to randomly generate what goes into that socket, right? But that's not really, I don't know. It could be a cool little exploration, but yeah, it's also not really elaborate, right? If you want to make it really elaborate, what you could do in that case is find a way where it would automatically snap certain attachments to certain types of windows, right? So that you have like a lot of control over it, and that you can make like a whole bunch of variations of windows, and it automatically filters for the assets that need to be spawned on top of the windows, for example awnings or something like that, right? Yeah, some good ideas in there. I will definitely say follow your heart on those. And then the last thing was, how would you see a trim sheet work for a project like this, right? With a trim sheet like this, when you're doing, let's open the ref again, right? Let's have a look here. Because a lot of this is going to be, I don't think necessarily trim sheets. what I would more look at in this case is, I mean, you could use trim sheets, right? But like I would be more inclined to look at modules, right? Like with modules, I mean like maybe uniquely textured stuff. Or well, you could use trim sheets for that, I guess. But like the main thing of the building is going to be tilables, right? So all this stuff going to be tilables. And then all these kind of like decorative frames could probably be trim sheets, right? Like even all this kind of stuff. And then where you have like more ornamental things, like, I don't know, some of these caps, right? Or some of these end pieces, like they would probably be made unique. I would probably take a little bit of time, make a nice sculpt for them, and then have them as like modular caps that I can just like place on like sections where I want it to be, right? So that would be my combination. So mainly tilables, and then trying with trim sheets to get like as much as these like, I don't know, trim sheet sections out of it as possible. And then for the more ornamental stuff, I would use unique items. It's the way that I would approach it. The ornaments was a question I just realized I wanted to ask about, but forgot. Yeah, that's the main thing, right? Like you could technically do the ornaments with a trim sheet as well, right? So you can 100% do that. However, I think, in my opinion, if you're gonna make ornaments, like it would be nice to have like a little bit of unique detail, right? And you could almost have, if you're thinking about like a trim sheet, right? Oh, I was trying to think on how to incorporate them into a trim sheet. Yeah, what I would do is you have like all your trim sheet sections, right? So you have like all your little bits of trims. And then, I don't know, at the bottom you have like a bunch of ornaments. Right? So this would be unique. And this would all be trim. It's usually a combination of the two, right? Be very interesting. And then, I don't know, let's say you're doing a test, right? And you're noticing that you need like a whole bunch of ornamental things. Like then you just split it off. You just split it off to like a different texture if you notice that there's a lot, right? So I would definitely like break down the amount of them that you're gonna need, and then just like, yeah, just like split it off. However, it's a choice, right? Like you can do them unique. There's also the option to make it with trim sheets as well. And then a cool benefit of what you could do with trim sheets is, let's say all these modules are made with a trim sheet, right? Try to standardize the trim sheet itself. Right? I don't know how are you gonna split it up, right? That comes more from like your testing with stuff. And then what you could do is, well, no, even in this case, right? Let's say for our example here, the bottom has one of these like nice like ornamental like bits, right? So this is a side view of one of those ornamental supports that is going to support one of the arches. right? You have one that is blank, and if you then create like a secondary trim sheet with like all the same stuff on it, then what you could do on that little trim sheet that you have here is maybe include like a little bit of like an ornament on the side, right? And the reason why you keep like the same layout is because then you can basically change everything up. So you could have one basic one, and you could have one like ornamental one. And because they're using the same layout, you can just swap between the two, and you don't have to re-UV anything because, yeah, it makes it like really versatile to just swap between those things. So you could also have like the trim sheets themselves could be like very decorative, right? So you could add like lots of decorations on here too. And then this could be like your stereotypical one, right? Where you just have like, I don't know, one of these kind of patterns on it. Right, but then this one actually becomes like a little bit more ornamental and has like a bunch of stuff on it. Yeah, and even if it has like some unique bits into it, right? You can just easily swap between the two. And then the additional benefit is you can kind of go crazy, right? Like with this sort of stuff, you could kind of go crazy in terms of like how you approach it. Because you could, if you have this basic trim sheet, you can then add on like a layer of dirt and grime that you might be able to control with like a slider or something like that, right? So you could have like an old version and like a new version. You could also change the color in the engine as well. And you're gonna end up with like tons of variation with just like 2 basic trim sheets, and they're using the same format, right? So this is like modularity on steroids almost. The negative side of things, or like the thing that you have to watch out here for, is that you have to do like a lot of planning, because let's say you find like a nice ornamental piece, but like your full trim sheet is already occupied and you've already made like an ornamental version of it, then you kind of just have to say, okay, I'm not going to build that at that point. But yeah, that's how I would approach it. Let me group this. Oh, hey. Dunk. Right. We use trim sheets. Cool. So nice one. Yeah, Mishla, thank you so much for sharing your work, and keep it up. Like there's gonna be, I'm sure you're gonna find some opportunities for tools here. You're gonna find some interesting stuff for sure. And yeah, great work, especially on the lighting. Like I like it. Some people brought up that it feels like a lo-fi background or something like that, right? Like, I think that's a good compliment. Keep it going. Okay, next one up. We got Route 1. With some... This is technically the solo challenge from last month, right? I mean, there's no... There's no deadline on this, so... Keep working on this indefinitely if you want. For For work in progress, could you look at the overall assets shown and see if they look good for the scene? Also, just some overall feedback on the scene. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Let's start with the assets then. If we're gonna be looking up close like this, we're gonna have to do some work on it. Let me actually sit down for this as well. What? Okay. Nice. So, where were we? So if you're gonna be presenting it in this way, right? You'll definitely have to work on it a little bit more. Let's see. Standing this slow motion coming down. Exactly. Because the rise over here feels flat. Feels a little bit on the flat side, right? One of the ways that you could potentially help this is by using the high texture. I know that this might be overkill, right? But I think if you want to show this like from this distance, yeah, it kind of has to look good, right? If you're not gonna look at it from this distance, and it's literally just gonna be like from this distance, then this is fine. But yeah, you can also fake a lot of stuff, right? Like, what you can try is push the normals. Like, trying to increase the normal intensity. That could also help. And then also add some AO in there. And the same can also apply for, especially for this one, right? Because this rise feels kind of decent. It has definitely some variation into it, and you can definitely see the internal, like the kernels themselves, right? But this rise in comparison feels very flat, right? So try to keep consistency between those two. And then also think about how this is constructed, right? Like what sushi looks like, where sushi usually has this core, and then like to the side it is packed with rice, right? And right now, because the pink is kind of like shining through, it kind of feels like the salmon is like to the edges, and the rice is just added on top of it. But that's not how that works, right? So it's usually, yeah, it's usually just rice and then like a little bit of salmon in the middle. Right, so kind of making that a little bit clear would be nice. I like where the salmon is going though. I think you could even make it more shiny than it is. Let's actually see. I mean, I'm just basing this from like eating sushi, so yeah. Look at this, right? Let's add that on here. Look at how orange/pink that is. And that's a pretty good representation, honestly. And then you have like these like nice white streaks going in the middle, where with the difference here is that the salmon here feels like a pattern, right? Like a deliberate pattern. And then yours feels like it currently feels like it just a little bit more like a tileable, right? So kind of getting like the deliberateness of like all of it in there. Would be cool. Yep, moving on. Put some other props in here as well. Yeah. I would say some cool branding on here would be nice. Like, what is the shop called? Like, do they have a mascot? Like anything like that, right? I think in Japan they're like really they have a different sense to how design and branding and all that stuff is perceived, right? So they usually tend to go like a little bit more crazy. So it would be cool if that's reflected on like some of this stuff as well, where it has like a very outspoken brand, you know? Yeah, rest of it looks good. I mean, these are like all small assets, right? So you could kind of go crazy. I can kind of go crazy and give like feedback on a lot of it. I think out of this whole selection, I think this one looks really nice. There's definitely more stuff that you can do with like pushing the textures and making them like a little bit more interesting, right? We talk about contrast a lot here, where you could have like more dirt layers where you build it up in like actual layers, where you think about like, okay, a knife is used, what did they use to cut it with? Like it's gonna be salmon, right? So it's gonna be kind of fatty. Like how is that going to be reflected on some of these knives as well, right? You could really go deep into this, right? Like depending on what they make, like this is more of like a cleaver, right? For big chunks of meat, where a sushi knife would probably be even more fine than this, right? Because they need like a very fine blade, like a very sharp blade, that cuts through like knife, that cuts through fish. So yeah, would be something to consider, right? Like looking at the stuff that you have here, and if it's actually representable of what is in a sushi restaurant. So what knives would he use? Be very interesting. It's also making the textures more interesting, right? Like I think the real selling point, especially when I would look at like artistic profiles, right? Is how people make the mundane stand out while not being so unique that they can't be used as mundane things. You know what I'm saying? Right? Like cardboard boxes, for example. Like how do you make like a good looking cardboard box, but it can't stand out from all the rest of the cardboard boxes? Right? There's some real fine artistry, like a game artistry, when it comes to making something like that look really interesting. And usually a lot of that has to do with how is it used, right? And there might be a lot of detail in here, maybe we just can't see it. But yeah, that'll be something to think about. And then on the scene itself, I think the main one is lighting here to me. We kind of spoke a little bit about it in the community chat already, right? Is I would go for something that has the appearance of it being in like a busy market street or something like that, right? You don't have to show the street itself, but there can be like a lot of lights in the background. But that's something that we talked about before, so I don't want to spend like a whole bunch of time talking about it again here. So making it more vibrant and interesting. Yeah, that would be it. We did talk a lot about like all the assets, so I think there's a lot that you can learn, or like a lot to look into when it comes to those assets. And in the scene, you can kind of tweak that over time, right? Yeah. Let's see. Was that everything? Yeah, cool. I think that was everything. Route 1, keep it up. Keep pushing the scene. Yeah, and I'm really curious to see what you're gonna do with the lighting. Like how you're gonna make that stand out. Because that's like the major part of this scene, right? It's like how you're gonna make that interesting. And then as I said before, like all this stuff, like it's very in depth, right? But if you're gonna do close-ups, like take that into account. If you're only gonna do it from this distance, maybe this is not necessary, right? Yeah. Good luck. I'm curious to see where it goes to next week. And then last but not least, we have Carl. Carl's making a cool little scene. Looking good so far. Lighting can be such a difficult thing sometimes. Yeah, 100% right, Andrea. It is really difficult. We do have a couple of workshops, by the way, if people are interested in how to light stuff, right? Like we do have a couple of workshops on our YouTube channel right here that people can check out if they wanted to. Because yeah, it is a very tricky topic. I've also always struggled with it, right? And what really helped me was looking at lighting through like the lens of what kind of mood do I want to set, right? And how can that support the story? Because sometimes I think what we do is we put like a lot of preparation into the scene itself, and we think about like, oh, how is this built? Like, how do I need to approach this? Blah blah blah. But then we get to the lighting, and it's like, oh, I guess I'll light it with like 3 lights, and I don't know, you know, like we don't do that same sort of preparation when it comes to lighting. Where sometimes it could be good to really try to match a mood, or like think about like, okay, I'm trying to tell this kind of story. What is a mood that would kind of come close to that, and how can I match colors to that mood, right? Like I'm kind of looking at story first, then breaking down what kind of a mood would be supportive of that story, and then look at the colors that might be supportive of that mood, right? So I'm kind of, it's the same kind of approach that you use if you look at a concept and you're trying to break it down into like, oh, this could be modular, this could be unique, this could be titleable textures, blah blah blah, right? You're kind of doing mental gymnastics into like breaking down a scene. It could be very helpful to do that when it comes to lighting as well. And that's where lighting studies come into place, right? Or like looking at movies, and one of the favorite examples that a lot of people bring up is Children of Men. Because, or maybe a more recent example is The Last of Us, if we're looking at games, right? Talking about The Last of Us 1. There's probably like a ton more examples, right? But like The Last of Us has a very distinct transition from the first couple of chapters where you're thrown into this world. You have to deal with like a big emotional impact in the beginning of the game, and the colors kind of reflect that. Because they're very very down, like they're on the blue kind of spectrum, and they're kind of like everything is kind of desaturated, right? And then as you progress through the story, like it gets more and more saturated. And it's this very subtle play of a reflection on the main character's mood, right? And that's sort of the same stuff we have to think about in a way as well, where we approach our art environments too. Anyway, Carl, let's have a look. Carl did a little update. Still want to do more things. Hanging plants, dirt decals on the wall, edge decals, vertex paint for a bit of moss. Yeah, this scene is looking awesome. I like where this is going. It's very good choice to stay away from red bricks on the pillars as well. Because it kind of adds like a nice variation in the scene. So very good choice. Yeah. I like it. Let's see, I'm just scrolling through like some of the previous ones as well. Yeah, it's a very good scene already. What I would say is, and I don't know if you did a pass on this already, right? But it's like, where do you want to draw the focus towards, right? Like it would, I'm kind of assuming that this is kind of the focal point of the scene, or should be, right? So maybe the lighting is kind of approaching it in like the opposite matter at this point, right? Like this is the darkest part of the scene, where the rest of it is kind of lighter than it. Which might be interesting to try flipping those two around. But it's an interesting one, right? Because that's what my mind says. But I'll be honest, I don't think that my heart agrees with it. I'll explain what I mean, right? Like that's like the reason why I point this out is because my brain is like, oh, normally the stuff that's lit the most gets the most attention, right? So that's like the very stereotypical way of like trying to pull attention to something in a scene, right? But sometimes there are scenes that kind of break the convention of it, and I don't mind it, right? It's doing something different and unexpected. I would definitely give it a try and see if this hits closer to what you want to achieve with it, right? Yeah, could be very interesting to kind of see what's going on. Yeah, some of the points already brought up by Carl himself is vertex paint for a bit of moss, right? Especially for blending these areas. So moss would be freaking awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing that come in. I would also look into, if you're gonna set up vertex paint, right? Like getting variation like in the texture, especially the brickwork, right? Like having, I don't know, having areas where there's like dirt, and maybe there's like a little gradient happening, right? Where you have like more dirt and then it goes to like less dirt. That you basically get this nice gradient from like the bottom towards the top, right? And it kind of blends everything together in like the corners, and you can then use the same kind of vertex paint in on like the edges as well on the floor to kind of get this like really nice blend between the walls and the corners of the floor, right? Because this is something that happens in real life as well, right? And you're kind of doing a great job here, by the way. It's like just adding some stuff in those corners, because that's where we usually don't pay as much attention to. But yeah, that dirt and just, you know, stuff is gonna accumulate in the edges. So that would be like really nice to add in here. Yeah, the rest of it looks really nice. The grapes look lovely. I like what you did with them. Subsurface scattering, maybe? I don't know if you have that going on right now. But that could be a cool one, you know, where you add like a little bit of translucency to the whole thing. You kind of give this fake effect of like, oh, the sun is hitting the grapes and it's you can kind of see it slightly through the grapes. Would be cool. Super nice. Yeah, and like vertex paint is definitely gonna help with these sort of areas, right? Where you just make it like slightly darker, right? And like kind of embed like all these things together. Right? So you have that edge and then maybe like the vertex paint goes over the edge certain points. Like, and I'm talking about like final polish bits, right? Where you just bring like everything together and you paint stuff together. Nice. I love this little bird butt over here. Sneaking that in. Just gonna call it BB. Bird butt. Yeah, cool stuff though. Very, very nice. Very nice. I think they have a little bit of subsurface. Yeah, I would be curious to see. I mean, again, I'm pulling this out of my memories right now, right? Like, it would be interesting to see if you can push it really far to see how much is too much, you know? Suggestion, you know? Be very interesting. BB. BB on the shelf. I think one of the main things, and I'm kind of hesitant to bring it up. I don't know what to feel about the door. I don't Yeah, I mean, that's just literally it. Like, I don't know what I need to feel about the door. It kind of feels like a wooden door in like a stone archway. It's kind of, you know, kind of weird. But then I like that you picked wood as well, right? Because it kind of works with like the rustic nature of the whole scene. But yeah. Maybe I don't know. Like, maybe it's because this aligns to like the plaster. I don't know, you know? Like, I generally don't know. Like, this is one thing where I kind of have some feelings about the door that I don't know how to explain. I'll have to think about that one. Yeah, no, great stuff. Great stuff, Carl. Not too much to say here, right? Like, all the stuff that you brought up, edge decals, vertex paint, dirt decals, hanging plants. You can do a lot more with the foliage, right? Like, you can have like a lot of vines like just hanging from the roof, like maybe on the sides, right, where like stuff is creeping behind like the wooden beams. But like all this stuff, I think you already have like on your list anyway. And also, I love the subsurface scattering on the leaves. Like, the leaves here feel very nice. Yeah. Like Scott said, very inviting, you know? Like, very, very rustique, like, inviting atmosphere that's happening here. So, I love it. I think I might make the door more rickety and dodgy. Yeah, maybe that's what it needs, right? Yeah. Yeah, give it a try. No, this is awesome, Carl. Great job. Great job so far. And I'm glad to see that you're not leaving it behind. Because I know things are a bit chaotic over there, but I'm glad to see you back at it, man. It's awesome. Um, cool. Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you so much for putting up your work. Looking forward to seeing this progress. And yeah, hopefully see something next week as well. That would be awesome. Cool. Let's switch it on over again. And I'm gonna keep it very short because we've already been over 2 hours. So I'm just gonna say thank you so much all for being here. If you like this, give it a like, share it with your friends, do whatever the YouTube algorithm wants you to do, and I would be very appreciative of that. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Thanks for having good conversations. I'll be back next week with Work in Progress Wednesday, and if you're interested in an art stream, go check it out on Friday. And then, yeah, for people that are new here, go check out like other stuff on our YouTube channel. There's a bunch of more cool content, not only live streams, but also workshops. Go check them all out. Yeah, with that said, I'm going to leave it here. Stay creative and have a nice evening, everyone. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.